Oi! What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Convoluted. I'm Jesse Asher, and today I'm going to talk to you about the case of U.S. Army Major Eric Smith, who was wrongfully convicted for a positive drug test in Washington. July 28th, 2011 at Madigan, M-A-D-I-G-A-N, Army Medical Center in Tacoma, Washington. Major Eric Smith, who was a physician in the U.S. Army, voluntarily submitted a urine sample for a drug test. From an appeals document that I found, which I'll link below, the sample was sent to Forensic Toxicology Drug Testing Laboratory at Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii. And according to the Innocence Project and that same appeals document, after the results showed positive for the cocaine, Eric Smith pretty much immediately sought for a hair follicle test to be performed. That testing for the hair follicle test was done on August 30th, 2011, and it presented no trace negative result of any presence of cocaine. And I'm going to just spare you some of those details because it gets a little complicated. I will link the document below so you can check it out for yourself if you want to read into some of those details. Something I got from popularmilitary.com, Eric Smith apparently wrote in the officer evaluation report in 2011, quote, "I am a medical review officer myself, and I know that cocaine can last in one's system for 1 to 5 days. If I had willfully used cocaine, why would I attend a urine drug screen that I am not required to attend? That does not make sense." Long story short, Smith was on rotation about an hour away and was excused from the urine test because of that rotation being away. So they excused him and told him he didn't even need to take it, but he still voluntarily went and took that test. The Army proceeded to court-martial Eric Smith with wrongful use of a controlled substance. And according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of court-martial is a court consisting of commissioned officers and, in some instances, enlisted personnel for the trial of members of the armed forces or others within its jurisdiction. And in September of 2012, Major Eric Smith went to trial, and I'm going to quote from the National Registry of Exonerations here. "Smith's defense attorney failed to provide a proper foundation to admit the follicle test as evidence, so the trial judge excluded the negative test result." Eric Smith even testified about his voluntary decision to take the urine test and understood the characteristics of cocaine, as I said from that quote. The defense attempted at showing there was possible contamination because the testing was performed in a temporary facility due to repairs being done at the toxicology lab. And from the National Registry of Exonerations, Major Eric Smith was convicted on September 28th, 2012, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison and loss of all pay and benefits. Eric Smith, though, he was released after about 7 months from prison on May 15th, 2013, as his sentence was commuted by the military. Apparently, he also took a polygraph test, which he passed. And according to SaveOurHeroesProject.org, it was in August of 2013 when his case entered the appeal process and he was granted permission to retest the urine sample. Eric Smith filed a motion to vacate his conviction in 2014. His reasoning was that his trial attorneys failed to properly admit the follicle test and the results of that follicle test, which denied him a fair trial. His attorneys also failed to call a witness or any witnesses that could have corroborated Smith's willingness to take the urine test. And according to the National Registry of Exonerations, after filing the motion, he got an independent DNA test for that urine sample that convicted him, and it showed that there was 2 different DNA profiles. One of those DNA profiles was of Eric Smith, but the other one was unidentified. It was an unidentified male. The U.S. Army Court of Criminal Appeals vacated Eric Smith's conviction on July 17, 2015, and a new trial was ordered. The decision, for some reason, though, did not take any notice of the DNA test results. However, it did mention the failure of Smith's attorney and his defense's inadequacy, but that was all that it mentioned. According to SaveOurHeroesProject.org, they didn't consider the negative follicle test either, or the negative polygraph, or the contaminated sample. He was vacated purely off ineffective assistance of counsel, which is nice that he got that, but I don't understand why they wouldn't take any of the other evidence, especially the follicle test. Those are pretty reliable. I'm going to quote again from the National Registry of Exonerations here. "The court concluded that Smith's lawyer's failure to properly investigate and evaluate the validity, strength, and relevance of the hair follicle test was unreasonable under prevailing professional norms. This was exculpatory evidence that, if admitted as substantive evidence, would have enhanced his defense. They also agreed that his defense should have called the witness, and the failure to call a witness was not reasonable. And the prosecution dismissed the case on September 2nd, 2015. But unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. Since his release from jail in May of 2012, Eric Smith was working in administration because he wasn't able to practice medicine anymore. And according to the Seattle Times, a 3-member panel of senior Army officials urged against any further punishment against the Army doctor Eric Smith. Eric Smith was still facing a disciplinary discharge from that contaminated drug test. But in March of 2016, that panel ruled that Eric Smith should be allowed to stay in the service until he retires. That panel made that decision after reviewing the evidence that indicated contamination to the urine sample and was contaminated by a second unknown subject. The cause of the contamination was undetermined, and the Army rejected Eric Smith's request for investigation into the handling of the urine sample. And a chemist also testified that the initial results should have been discarded because of that contamination. That website, SaveOurHeroesProject.org, goes into a lot more detail about all the guts, if you will, in relation to the testing facilities, the Army dragging their feet. It also went into detail about his character and unprofessional behavior, as the Army was attempting to claim. But by all accounts and witnesses, Eric Smith was never of bad behavior or unprofessional behavior. He actually received a ton of praise from a lot of the people that he worked with. And I'm going to spare you a lot of those details because it's a lot of bureaucracy and military jargon and all that, so it's kind of confusing, a little tough to read sometimes. But if you want to know yourself, then of course I got the article linked below. You can click on it and read. Before retiring from the Army, Eric Smith wanted to be able to practice Army medicine again, or just medicine again, period. And during the time of that drug test, the initial drug test, Eric Smith had dealt with alcoholism and successfully completed a treatment program by his request, but the Army was refusing to reinstate his privileges, alleging that he failed to respond to that treatment. However, the board found evidence on the contrary, and Eric Smith had complied with all rehab efforts. I'm going to quote something that Eric Smith said from the Seattle Times. "I was innocent, and I am still being punished because I can't return to my profession." According to the Seattle Times, before Smith was going to retire, he wanted to regain his privileges to practice Army medicine because he feared that it would be tough to get work as a doctor in civilian life once he retired. The reason that was an issue is because the Army filed a report with the National Practitioner Data Bank, which is a clearinghouse accessible by employers, and apparently it still cited positive cocaine tests at the time of the Seattle Times article that I used to research this. Eric Smith, of course, he was hopeful that the board's findings would get them to review his permanent revocation of privileges, but the Army refused to consider the case. I don't know why. They were being stubborn as hell, it seems. But in August of 2016, Smith filed a complaint with the Inspector General's office, which was referred for a Defense Department investigation. But that's the last I was really able to find on this case, and that's where we leave off. So he did get clear of that conviction, but he's apparently, up to the latest date that I found, still just trying to fight for his right to be able to practice medicine again so he can be a physician in civilian life as well. A lot of bureaucracy and stubbornness, and seems like something that should have been excluded and wiped clean pretty early after that follicle test especially. It shouldn't even be an issue, it seems, but for some reason it's still an issue. Anyway, thank you guys for making it to the end of another video. I really appreciate any of you that stick around and watch through the whole thing. Make sure that you subscribe, like and share and comment and all that to help the algorithm out, of course, and help me grow. The more I grow, the more I can help out and reach out with, covering these cases, but also making donations in the future, all that stuff. Of course, I'll link down the National Exoneration Registry. You can check that out. We got pretty much every case of exoneration on there. You can read about some yourself. This case didn't have really an Innocence project or anything involved, but I would still advise you to check some of them out. There's so many, just Google them. There's Wisconsin Innocence Project, Florida Innocence Project, Georgia Innocence Project, New Orleans Innocence Project. There's tons, Montana. So check them out, do some Googling, volunteer, or read up on some stuff of what they're about, and just get a little educated on it. Every source that I used for this episode will be linked below, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode.